So let's go ahead and we're almost an hour in, so I think that was a pretty good stopping point, anyways.
Yeah.
So all right, let's talk Star Fox. Actually, while I'm changing the stream title, for us to do Star Fox 2, I'm gonna let you go first. Give me your thoughts, hot takes, fresh thoughts.
I don't know. I think that this is a game that has just been obliterated by time. When I
Yeah.
when I think of the fourth generation, especially Nintendo's output, I think of a lot of evergreen titles that are just still immaculate to go back to. Whether or not they've arguably topped something like a Super Metroid. For me, I prefer the GBA titles, but Super Metroid is still defining. It really brought its series to prominence. It still plays excellently today, and I think that Star Fox is just a victim of being effectively a tech demo. I mean, really, its function at the time was to show off that FX chip, and it does, but ultimately that was already pushing it back in '93. So you play it today, and it's hard to really justify spending serious time with Star Fox when something like 64 exists, which I do feel like, unlike a zero mission to a super, does completely overwrite it in my opinion. So while it's there's a certain charm and camp to the way that the SNES title is for Star Fox, I just don't think it holds up from a gameplay level, and it's the purity and the fluidity of the moment-to-moment experience in 64 that I think makes that game so enduring, and that's just not here in the original.
Yeah. So I'm gonna almost completely agree with everything you're saying. I said it earlier while we were actually playing that Star Fox walks so Star Fox 64 could run. Like you said, it's very much a tech demo of the game itself because, like you said, when this game came out, I don't even necessarily know if it was meant to be a franchise or a series that's so beloved today. Like it very much was, here's these anthropomorphic animals in space doing stuff. In fact, I do not quote me on this. I am just pulling this out of my rear with this, but the game itself is called Star Fox. Take the fox at the end. If you take out the O, it's just FX. I feel like even the concept of them being animals and the main
Sure.
character being a fox might have even just been inspired by FX chip. Was like Star FX. Let's put an O in there. Oh, fox. Yeah, that sounds fine. We'll just run with that. That if that's real, if that's real, please tell me. Please tell me. I just like that's just what it came to mind. But it sounds right. But just because, like you said, this is a test for the FX chip, and then it just became a beloved game to initially get another sequel on the Super Nintendo that ultimately got canceled and then released many years later, and then ultimately came the actual sequel was Star Fox 64, which is not even really a sequel because it's a reboot. Like
Yeah.
yeah, like it's like you said, the 64 it just almost invalidates this game because we're gonna get into that more when we go into Star Fox 2. But I think even like while this game was a technical marvel of its time that it could even exist, it's very. I think that might be another reason why it wasn't released as Virtual Console as much, is because of how dated the game was from a visual standpoint. Like the Super Mario World or Kirby's Dream Land 3, which, as you described, as evergreen titles, where this one graphically is not. It's not because of just how it looks. To the point where Star Fox 2, didn't come out because, by that point the N64 is going to come out with actual 3D graphics. So
Right.
what would pseudo 3D graphics be compared to that? So which is why that game ultimately got scrapped. So I think even they realized that, once 64 came out, there was just really no point into even going back to the original Star Fox, or they just used the original story as a basis and just basically started over. And as someone like me who grew up with starting with 64, that was obviously a boon to me. Because can you imagine if I had gone all those years like loving Star Fox and not knowing what the first game was? In this case, it really didn't even matter because the story did
Yeah.
start with 64, and they just kept going from there for a long time before Zero came and rebooted it again. So I think the summary of everything is, if you're a Star Fox fan, I really do think you owe it to yourself to try the game out just so you can really know where it all started, know the origins of the series, how we got from here to where we are now. But if you're not a Star Fox fan, I don't think there's anything here for you.
Yeah.
And even if you, whether you are or you aren't, I don't think there's too much here for you besides a curiosity to like learn. Like even us, like there's not really going to be too much of a desire for either of us to really come back to this game and play it more because again, other games just kind of validate. It's not like it doesn't stand up on its own like other Super Nintendo games of the era. It's just a prototype for what came later, and it's a game that I want to keep existing to play for the education value of it. Game preservation. I think that's very important. That this game is always readily available to play for those who can those to see how this game was. But as far as being a fun game, it was like, yeah, I really feel like playing Star Fox. And no, I don't think that's real. I think
I think about
yeah. Go ahead.
well, sorry, but what I was going to say is that when you think about the fifth generation,
Mm-hmm.
you always think back about the few titles that held up, but there are so many games that don't play too well today, and a big thing to consider was that jump from 2D development to 3D development was so challenging. That was a complete recontextualization of what so many developers had learned, and they were forced to implement the same philosophies with a completely new axis of motion. And even though Star Fox is simulated 3D, the developers are forced to think in that space before the hardware could even support those ideas. So if you think about developers who are having trouble on a PS1, a Saturn, an N64 when 3D was they were capable, rudimentary but capable 3D machines. This was before they even had that affordance. There was no cushion there, right? And so I kind of think of it that way. Of course, it is an SNES game, but when I think of SNES development, I think of polishing NES development. I think of the jump from the series and where they were on that hardware to this. And here, I feel it's a very similar way to Super Mario Kart, actually, where this was new. This was so far ahead of its time that it's hard to really be disappointed by the way that the games don't hold up, because ultimately they laid a foundation that is incredible. But to that extent, just play Star Fox 64, play Mario Kart 64, and appreciate what these did. But you can appreciate it from a distance, I think.
For sure. And I think that's an excellent point, actually, how there are a lot of Super Nintendo games that took what the concepts of the NES were and just like brought them to their natural conclusion. And then there's the opposite end of the spectrum where Super Nintendo games that are building on a concept that the N64 brought to its natural conclusion. Like you could argue that Super Mario World was the proper evolution of where the Super Mario Brothers series needed to go. But in this case, it exists in the same console as Star Fox, which was the predecessor to the baby, if you will, to what Star Fox 64 would be, evolve and flourish. And I think it's very interesting looking at perspective. It's not one that I've really considered, but I guess to some extent, all consoles have those kind of games, right? Where, in fact, you can almost even put that in the sense of like the early games just being much better versions of what already came before, and the later games being prototypes for what would come later. I think that's a cool perspective. I've never really considered that. Yeah. So with that, all that being said, Star Fox, oh man. I feel like if you're someone that grew up with the game, you probably could get some enjoyment out of it. And again, if you're a Star Fox fan, it's good to play it just so you can know where it all started. But it's not a game that does hold up at all. Like if we're just like by our definition of whether a game holds up or not, it doesn't. It just simply doesn't, because it's a full game, but performance wise, it's just not developed enough to where the series would go later at its peak. Which, if you're a purist, is 64. If you're looking for other things, maybe other Star Fox games. But I think 64 is beloved for a reason, and I'm just glad that this game exists so that we can eventually lead into that.
All right. I need to ask my light bulb if it's going to hold up. I don't know. I think that's going to get changed. Let me try it. Let me just do that. There we go.
All right, cool.
Oh, I can deal with my lighting issues when I'm done streaming.
All right. So, yeah, guys, we would also like to say that Abram's light bulb does not hold up. It gets a 0 out of 10.
No, it certainly does not.
All right. So now we're going to move on to our second